are going to be talking suspension with Mr. Joe Castello. So it is 11 a.m. here in California. Again, thank you for being with us for Race Industry Week 2021. Joe, on to you.
Thank you very much, Francisque and Judy. Appreciate what you guys are doing. It's Friday at Race Industry Week here on EPARTRADE. If you're watching around the world, remember, you can always ask questions in the chat section. We'll get to them and take it in a direction, maybe different from where I'm going. We'll definitely feed it to the guys. David and Jeremy, how are you guys doing?
Hey, we're good. Welcome to Eibach, where it's springtime year-round, as Wilfred Eibach likes to say.
I love it. I love it. Okay, so wait, who's David and who's Jeremy, just so I know?
I'm David.
I'm Jeremy.
I gotcha. Thank you very much. And we're going to be talking about spring loads, static, dynamic. You've got springs all over the place, which I love. We're going to delve into it. This is getting the power to the ground is something that we are always talking about. Not only that, but performance. So you are in a very specific field that is, absolutely vital to the motorsports enthusiast.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I would say that a lot of people, the new racers are very aware of what a spring can do, but the shocks are typically more sexy and get a lot more attention. So sometimes springs go overlooked, but I think these days, the more technology that comes out, the more rating tools and whatnot, the springs are people are realizing what a vital part of the suspension they really are. So they're, getting a little more attention than they used to, but definitely, a key component to the suspension as a system.
So let's get into it. What the difference between static and dynamic spring loads for the uninitiated, like myself? Walk us through some of these terms and why they matter.
Sure. All right. Well, let's start from the beginning. As a definition, a static load is a fixed load or a force that's applied gradually. So, for example, a spring that's simply holding the weight of a car that's not in motion would be considered a static load. A dynamic load is a changing load or a pressure or force that can be applied varyingly. So once the car is in movement, the springs undergo a dynamic load as the force travels, through the different conditions, pavement or road conditions or whatnot. So the spring is, once it's in motion, is what we consider a dynamic load.
I guess a good relation would be your race car in the shop, scaling it, measuring it, that kind of thing. Then dynamic load is what you're going to see on the racetrack, which obviously the easy term is always static load, but the most crucial, I find, of course, is going to be your dynamic loads. That's what everybody really needs to focus on more than static, in my opinion.
Yeah, so that's been the transition over the years, I think, is, typically people used to take a car to a scale, and that was kind of where they would, do all the magic, set it up and make all their measurements or whatnot, and then take it out and race it. Once the car goes into a race, dirt car, the body hills, right? So, once the car is up at attitude, or what the racers now call a dynamic or race attitude, all the scale numbers go out the door. So, and that's the same with the spring. Once the old theory used to be, kind of whatever held the car up to get through an inspection or whatever the case may be, a certain height measurement, depending on the series. That's kind of where they started, and then whatever it took to keep the car from hitting the ground or whatnot, kind of was the second part of that equation. Where now it's completely different. It's what they consider a static, or going through a inspection checkpoint height or whatnot is critical for obviously getting through the inspection. But the dynamic or the car at race attitude is definitely the most important piece of the component now, because that's where all the magic happens, right?
Well, exactly. And so you referenced the shocks or the sexy part of it, but how do they coexist together? Like, what are their specific jobs? Walk us through, as experts in this field, walk us through what each one does independently of each other, and then how do they work together and formulate what is a package that ultimately helps these cars perform.
Sure. So I'll give a quote that Mr. Eibach, Wilfred Eibach, once told me, and I'll never forget it because it was a great way to understand how the two work together. But he basically said the spring is the dynamic husband carrying the heavy loads of the family and bouncing all around, and the shock is the calming wife trying to control the husband's tendencies. So
Interesting.
yeah, it's kind of a funny saying, but it's very true. So obviously the spring doesn't have anything slowing it down once it is compressed and opening back up. So it's literally controlling weights at certain points. We can get into more of that later, but the shock is obviously controlling the speed at which it does that, keep it from continuing to bounce on down the road.
Controlling that wheel load, keeping that tire in the ground. Shock's kind of goal is to slow that process or speed that process up through its travel. So spring holds the car up, spring applies that load to the tire, to the ground. Shock just controls that.
Excellent. So in terms of like current trends, we've been speaking with people all week, and the constant evolution of all fields in motorsport is like the only thing that we can rely upon, right? That things are going to change. What are the current trends in suspension, and how is it changed recently, or has it? Give us a little insight into that as what you guys do with research and development evolves over time. Like what's current, what's happening, and how is it evolving?
Sure. I think we can take the last question and kind of elaborate a little bit more and into this question, but springs have mainly three jobs. They store and release energy, they absorb shock, and they maintain contact between two surfaces. A street car spring has to support the weight of a vehicle, absorb imperfection, and keep all the tires planted on the ground. In a race car, comfort sometimes goes out the window if there's a traction advantage. So sometimes the drivers don't get the advantage of the nice spring or the shock absorption, if they're really making good traction or whatnot. So I think that's some of the where the advances have been made is the ability to really to see what those loads are with the different tools that are available out there with pull down rigs and spring smashers and whatnot, and the upgrades of shocks and whatnot as well. So that obviously affects what we're doing with springs, what we're making, how they're using them. So that's kind of some of the biggest trends. Jeremy can kind of tell you some of the preloading trends or whatnot that have been going on, but
yeah, I mean that the shocks, like you said before, they coincide. They do work together. You have to have that, and that allows us to have your preloads. So you got your dirt late models, your dirt modifieds. Even this has translated over to NASCAR, and a lot of the series there is like David said, is the preload. Mostly in the left rear, you're going to see a lot of preload in that spring. So we're going to much taller springs, much lighter rates. So our technology has been in that kind of realm of building a taller, lighter spring, keeping it to where there's no side deflection, aka bowing, keeping the spring in line with that. So as the shocks get better with that, they can control that better. We can build a much more superior spring to it. Translates to these teams are putting much more preload in the left rears and getting that left rear tire in the ground, even as a car rolls over. That even in the asphalt world, that's kind of a normalcy now. I know a lot of road course stuff, they're doing the same thing as well, both rear springs. That translates to, you got so much preload in the rear, you have to manage the negative effect on the front of the car. That turns into bump springs, bump rubbers. There's many different ways. Some guys are coil binding springs in the front. So we have to make sure that our springs are capable and have, the forward progression of that spring to be capable of those loads. I mean, it goes through the roof once that happens. So
I think it's in every form of racing, too, Joe. Like let's take Formula One for example. I mean, completely different than the short track stuff. But look at the difference in these cars now. I mean, they're completely jacked up when they're sitting there at static, where the rears are up, and you can see right under the rears. You look back at the old days, they were completely slammed on the ground. But what they're doing is they're going with a longer, lighter spring. Basically, same thing Jeremy was just talking about. Obviously, a different form of spring or whatnot, but they start with the car really high to keep the spoiler as high as possible, and the aero loads squat the car down until they're basically gone. When the speeds are pushing the aero down to where they want. This is obviously accomplishing a couple different things. One, the rear of the car is the spoiler is up in the air to get the maximum amount of aero when the car is going slow. But at higher speeds, when the car squats, the aero loads are greater than the spring load, which creates a battle of forces between the aero and the spring. So basically, it's the spring's wanting to unload, and the aero's saying no, we're not going to let you unload because the applied force is greater. So it's allowing that spring to constantly have a force against it, pushing it down, which is obviously creating grip. So in that scenario, they're using the rear basically only to push it down, and the front's got the huge wing or whatnot as well. But that's where they're creating their force. If you're looking at a short track car like a dirt late model or something like Jeremy was saying, the goal is almost 100% opposite. Cars are stacking springs in combinations to keep the car as low as possible to get through an inspection. Yet when they get back onto the track, as soon as they hit the gas, that car stands completely up, getting that spoiler up in the air as much as possible. Now they're not getting the aero loads because the speeds aren't as high. The tracks are smaller and whatnot, so they want that spoiler up in the air to get that aero load pushing it down. So, but there again, with the technology of having the spring smashers, they're controlling the loads at every given point. So they know exactly once that car gets up at attitude where they want it. And this is helping, find that balance on the track. So, the balance of aero against mechanical, the old saying of what, mechanical grip would be. And I think that's the biggest difference is now, teams are really understanding how to utilize this information. They have tools to test it, and they're just getting, it's trickling down the system a lot faster from the upper ranks. So, which again, I think leads back to what Jeremy was saying. It's forced us to kind of, make sure our springs are going to withhold these forces at the range that they're going, the length of the springs. A lot of them gotten longer and lighter, and make sure that they can withstand.
Excellent. At this point, let's give the point of contact for folks out there. And I know, waiting to the end is like a thing, but I like to get it out there because people want to know where to go. They want to maybe hit the website while they're listening to you guys, or pop off an email with a couple of different subjects in it. So why don't you give that contact information? And at the same time, you folks out there on EPARTRADE watching, whether watching on YouTube or racer.com, or even through the Zoom call on EPARTRADE, you've got excuse me, if you've got a question for these guys, put it in the chat section right now. Let's take this in a couple of different directions. What I'm impressed by is, Jeremy, he's the motorsports specialist. Like, that's pretty broad. That is a broad segment. We're going to ask Jeremy a couple of questions, but give that contact information, David.
Yeah, so Eibach.com, great segue because our website's actually a really, really good tool for racers. I think currently we have over 1,350 motorsports parts. Majority of them are springs, but we do make some other bits and pieces. But Eibach.com, you can go and you can pull out our whole BRS catalog. You can search by a length or an ID. Give you all the rates, or a specific rate, whichever way you want to look it up. And under that platform, you can see all of the specifics of the spring. You can see the block heights, the max loads and complete load numbers and all that stuff. So the website's a really, really good tool. Eibach.com once again, as well as all of our street performance applications, UTVs and all that stuff are listed there. You can punch in by your make and model. or whatnot. So yeah, it's a great tool. Eibach.com.
It also has, YouTube links. We've got some video. We got a good marketing team that puts together these videos to show you what we do have, but also to show you how you can apply that to your specific car. Whether it's race cars, there's a couple of videos on there where we're showing preloads and travel, how you measure travels and this and that. The off-road world, there's actually a couple formulas on there where you can do your double spring systems, your triple spring systems on the off-road trucks. So you can go on there and see all that as well. So that's a good tool.
Excellent, excellent. And to that point, Jeremy, as the motorsports specialist, right? Like you have to be very versatile because there are a lot. You mentioned, we're talking, off-road trucks, and we're talking Formula One in the same 2 minutes. And one thing, what's common between them? Well, they got wheels and tires, and they got springs. That's to be able to kind of walk in both of those worlds. We got a question right now from someone that says, what are the trends in front wheel drive road racing? So just kind of talk about some of the varying things you see out there in the motorsports world.
Yeah, I mean, it's very true. It's Formula One. I always say, in comparison to go-karts, they're equally as important to us. And so I never say down to, but there's some oval kart stuff that's applying some springs now, quarter midgets. They're huge on springs. They're usually springs all the way around. And then, yeah, you have to understand enough in the off-road world, the road racing world. Drag racing is a huge thing. That's kind of become a very popular one over the last couple of years. Everybody here generally has a good terminology with race cars, and most everybody is involved. And we're kind of spread around. We got a bunch of guys in the road race world. We've got some drag racers here. David and I, we've always done oval track stuff. I've personally worked on a couple of IMSA teams, prototype cars and everything else. So between all of us, I think that's what helps, is having such a broad spectrum of real racers here, right? We all know what we want. We understand what our particular race format is going to need for a spring. There's a lot of technology and terminology that goes into building the spring, but then you have to also know how it's applied to everything from an off-road truck, a buggy, UTVs is a huge market for us right now. So that's kind of, everybody's on board with that one right now, just keeping ahead of the game. Anything with road racing. In fact, this morning, a couple of our guys are on an email chain with, making sure that we're staying on top of the homologation with a lot of the series, making sure that we're not slacking on keeping that in stock for those guys. They're stuck on making or using those particular springs. We got to be ahead of that game. At the same time, I get an email right afterwards, say, hey, we're building for King of the Hammers. I know you had Dave Cole on earlier in the week. King of the Hammers is right around the corner. So we're dealing with road race. The next minute, we're bouncing over to let's build an Ultra 4 car. And the technology in that world has gone through the roof in the last couple of years. We go down and we have a couple of buddies with Fox Shocks. I personally go down there for a week or two for King of the Hammers, and we actually go out and we test. We watch the trucks. We do everything we can and measure it all out. And so the technology there, I personally think, has been kind of on the back front, but now is on the forefront. So seeing some of these trucks getting built is pretty cool.
I think Jeremy's being a little bit modest there too. I mean, he's got a really big background in racing and understands it. I think that's the biggest key. Like you said, we all have a different specialty in racing that seems like everybody here has got something they're involved with. But yeah, you have to understand the cars as well. And Jeremy's got a good understanding. He can go out and he knows personally, some IMCA modified teams that he'll go out and work with. Like you said, the off-road teams, worked on IMSA. So, just having a background and understanding the cars helps you understand what the teams need. So sometimes they don't, if things are changing or whatnot, they don't even know exactly what they need. So, or what we're capable of, or what, what the next thing is. So it takes an understanding of knowing cars and the rule packages. I mean, that's another thing. It's one thing to understand the cars, but to know the rule packages and stuff too. So yeah, Jeremy does a really good job at that, but the whole team does. And for that matter, we work globally. We manufacture in Germany and also in China. So we have a global motorsports division that we work together with. So I mean, we're literally dealing with Formula One, Nürburgring cars over in China. CC or what,
Yeah,
whatnot.
there's so many series there
And
too.
then, of course, America, we race everything there is, including lawnmowers over here. So
No joke.
yeah, it's definitely a wide variety of stuff that we're dealing with.
All right, we got a couple of questions, guys, and everybody out there, load them up with questions out there in the chat section. General trends for front wheel drive road racing. Talk about a specific market, right? But it's happening out there, and you drive them differently, the whole deal. Talk a little bit about that for Raymond.
You want to touch on that?
Yeah, I mean, I would just say it's the same thing. I mean, freeloading is kind of the the name of the game wherever you go. So I think I don't have a lot of specific background in front wheel drive, even though a lot of these guys do here. I know we have played around with some preloading and some bump springs and whatnot. I would definitely think that's depending on your rule package and what you can do. Give us a call. We definitely have some guys that probably can give you a little better info than we can, but definitely trying to store that energy with the preloading and then having fall to a rate that's gonna give you the grip that you want. So it's kind of the name of the game in any motorsports right now.
Yeah, I mean, to add on to the front wheel drive stuff, from what I've been seeing, kind of been in touch with, is making sure you have a long enough spring with enough preload in the rear. You kind of want to keep everything. I mean, your steering forces and your drive forces are on that front end, so you want to keep as much load planted there. Yeah, you don't want the back to lose grip either, but that's your biggest focus, keeping everything on the front tires and able to point when you're on throttle. So there's quite a bit of information. I think it's kind of specific to the type of vehicle you have, aero packages. By all means, give us a call direct. We'll sit here with you and tell you we're both comfortable with what your vehicle is and make sure you're going fast.
Yeah, and again, our phone numbers are on, if you go to eibach.com, all of our phone numbers are on there, so feel free to give us a call.
Exactly. Only nice calls, guys. Only nice calls. Garrett wants how often do you replace springs versus shocks? And I think it's a great question. Like, how long do springs last?
Well, that is a great question.
It's a loaded one.
Yeah, go ahead.
Isn't everything loaded with springs though?
We get this one all day, every day, so
yeah,
we should
we
be
do.
really good at answering it, but it's actually a little bit difficult.
There's no solid answer to that, to be honest. But we've had national champions, circle track road race. It doesn't matter. They're on. In fact, the IMCA modified driver that just won Bristol Dirt Nationals this year. I was making fun of him. I was there myself, made fun of him because he literally has 11, 12-year-old springs in his car. He literally won that race with old springs. And so that gives a testimony to how long the springs actually do last. They do last.
Can last.
They can last, yes. Now, for peace of mind, as inexpensive as a spring can cost when you're looking at the broad picture of how much a race team costs, my personal opinion, I think David goes right along with this. I would say, yes, some series you can get 60 to 80 races a year. I say about that time, I would just go ahead and do it anyway. They're probably not bad. There's probably nothing changed in it, but for the peace of mind and for as inexpensive as they can be, why would you risk it? Goes along too, though. We always say, once you get a spring, get a good base for your notes. When you get a new spring from us, throw it on your spring smasher, spring raider, whatever you have, and get an exact rate, travel numbers, everything you get for that particular spring. Every spring is a little different, just a touch different. And then just follow through with that throughout the year. Go 20 races in, 15, whatever, however particular you are. Pull a spring out, you're maintaining it anyway, whether it's a part around it or the spring itself, the perches, whatever, throw it on the spring raider. Just make sure there's no changes. If there is any change, it's your discretion, but if it was me, I'd start looking at a new spring.
Got
To
it.
add to
Okay.
that,
Yes.
Joe, to add to that, I think part of what we didn't explain is what could cause some physical damage is spring wire is extremely corrosive inside. So we go through a couple processes to make sure that the coating is really adhered very well, starting with a mineral bath that really adheres to the raw metals, and then our physical powder coating, which is a really good quality coating, and we do everything in-house here to ensure that everything's the quality is up to speed. But once that coating is starting to chip, and it can be caused by a lot of times obviously in the dirt, getting rocks and debris or whatnot, but it can also happen in coil clashing too. If coils really being pushed quick or whatnot, and the first couple coils are really banging off each other, or the spring is sitting there. This is a flat wire tender, but if the spring is completely compressed, if they're a coil bind setup like we talked about these days, it could start wearing. So once the coating starts wearing down to the raw metal, the actual spring wire is very corrosive. So that's where the rust veins can start to create. So chips are very known for that, especially in the off-road world. Anywhere from a modified to trucks and whatnot getting hit at high speed. So once that starts to happen and you start washing your vehicle, that's where the rust veins can start. You can't really see them from the outside. You'll see minor rust to start, but the chips are fairly small, but that vein can start going through the spring. It's amazing once you get the spring back after, it's broken or whatnot, we look at it and that rust has kind of gone, all the way through the outside of the circle or whatnot around the coating, or, diagonally across. And that's where the weak points start happening. So like Jeremy said, it'll start to give you a little bit of notice if the spring is starting to lose height. That's a pretty good indication. But washing it, keep a water repellent. Obviously, keep the rust off. A spring bag or something to protect them while they're being raced is.
I agree.
A lot of people don't.
And guys, I just want to tell you that
I was referenced to, and I mean,
the last 10 seconds, I don't know if you guys can hear me, but your video is pausing, like it's just like stopping and starting a little bit. So I don't know if it changed on your end, but it was very stable and now it's just glitching a little bit. Let's see if we got it back working. Go ahead.
Starting to get a little bit from.
Yeah, you're frozen. It's bizarre because it was working so well, and now you're a little frozen. I don't know about now. Let's try to fight through it a little bit. Like Nick, does raising the spring seat increase spring rate? So let's try to get to that. As you guys are, again, it's just you're pausing and like starting and stopping, like something's cutting in and out. But we see you the whole time. We just do not hear you. So let's try to get it. Try to get going again, and hopefully it'll clear up.
We're gonna have to get some flashcards.
Oh, I love that idea.
Can you hear us now?
Yes, yes.
Okay. Just if you didn't hear the end of that, once the rust veins start and you start seeing some loss of height or rate change or whatnot, that's a pretty good sign to get rid of if you didn't hear the end of that. So, but protecting them with spring bags or any way you can, and then when you're washing them with some oil or whatnot, definitely is a good way to ensure the longevity of a spring. But once you start seeing some actual physical height loss or whatnot, it's probably a good time to move on and get a new set.
Copy that. Okay, Nick, does raising the spring seat increase spring rate?
No.
Well, it depends on the situation.
Now, I'm guessing that they're probably talking about the spring table. If that's the case, it does numerous other things. The spring is going to be what it is. So that doesn't change. Now, what you're doing with how the vehicle feels the load, that's a big thing. Yes, that is very important. It does not change what the spring is providing for load or your rate to get to that load, but it does change how that car feels that load. Yeah.
Well, it does depend on the situation as well. If you're talking about a fixed to purchase, where the spring's taking up the whole distance. If you're adding something in there, of course, you're going to have to squeeze that spring more to get it in there.
That's preload. Yep.
Yeah, that's more of a kind of a strut type situation on a street performance car or truck. We're talking racing. Typically, we have a little bit of the spring doesn't completely fill the distance between where the two purchase sit. So it depends on what application they're talking about. But yeah, as Jeremy was talking about in a racing application where the springs aren't completely touching the purchase when they're extended, no, it would not.
Yeah, I mean, it all translates to, example, 100 rate pounds per inch, right? So if you're compressing that spring past the 1 inch, the load's greater. So yes, if you're compressing that spring, it's definitely the rate doesn't change, but your load does. That's going to be 100 pounds per inch all the way through travel until you start touching coils together. But the load does change if you're compressing the spring. Yes.
Got it. What are some of the myths out there about springs that people talk about? Things that you guys hear that you're like, ooh, that's not how it is. So I know in every field of motorsports, there's something like that where people kind of come with a wives' tale, preconceived notion, something that's just a myth and incorrect.
Yeah, I'm sure we've all heard plenty of them. I mean, springs rebounding faster than the compression or something silly like that. That's definitely not accurate. Springs, that would be called hysteresis. Springs typically are going to push back at the same speed that they're going to close with. It's just simple physics, right? Whatever force you push upon it, it's going to push back with the same force. Whereas like a bump stop, not a bump spring, but like a rubber bump stop, will actually rebound quicker than it pushes, which some people use in their setups. But I think some of the stuff that we were talking about, I think all comes from the way springs are built. And they're definitely not all created equal. Once you get a spring next to each other and you have, the red one, the blue one, the black one, the yellow one, they all look very similar, right? Because they're
spring to spring, right?
Yeah, they're
quite not true.
They're somewhat wound the same or whatnot, but that's couldn't be farther from the truth. So what's under the spring definitely is completely different. So I think what separates Eibach from some of the other companies is it does start with the wire that we use. We operate, obviously, like I said, on a global level. So we manufacture in Germany, China, and here, obviously, in the United States. So we have the ability to buy the highest grade wire possible at a global level. So this kind of helps separate. We don't accept anything less than the grades that we recommend. So where some of the lower manufacturers possibly or whatnot. So that's probably the biggest thing that separates us from some of the other brands. But also what goes into that is all of our spring wire comes pre-hardened. So we do not hot wind any of our springs. Everything that we do here in the racing world is cold wound, which some people might be asking, what's the difference? But a hot wound spring is where you actually heat it up, coil it around a mandrel or whatever the case may be. But that creates another step in the process that's hard to control. So as you heat and as you cool metal, obviously things can change. We allow or rely on the professional spring makers to control the processes, like I said, of getting us the wire that we need up to the specifications that we request. And then we have some of the best CNC machines in the world that allow us to coil this stuff without being hot wound. So not only are our springs not coiled, they're wound, and they're wound. Our machines have a third axis on them. So it allows us to not only just coil in a two-dimensional way, but we actually have an arm that kicks that allows us, as we're turning, to push a third axis as well. So it allows us to turn and make some angles that are different than just what you could do on a mandrel. So when you sit back and you look at a spring, you would never see that, except for some of the the shapes of some of the springs that we have do definitely show that off. Like some of the NASCAR springs that we used to do definitely have some unique shape, and they were going for a really unique rate characteristic. So they were actually digressive because the old rule packages of the Cup Series, again, they were trying to get through inspection with the cars up. But as soon as they got on the track with a little air load, they wanted them just to fall and, onto the track and stay there. And that's where the spring and shock package again would work together. The shocks were valved enough to kind of hold the cars there as long as possible, but when they came back through tech, they would slowly come back up, and they'd get through the line as slow as possible until when they got through the inspection line, they were back up in height. So it's all a game,
Races would never do that.
Yeah,
Never.
No.
Never.
We work with the teams just as much as they work with us to give them the product that they want. But those are some of the differences. And the other thing is we go through all the processes that it takes, which everybody might not know the processes. And I actually have a video here we can show you in a second. But shop painting, tempering, and presetting are all steps that we go through with every single race spring. Some of the manufacturers, if you see a lower price point, might be skipping some of those steps because they're not absolutely necessary for what you may see on the table. But when you get that spring into a performance situation, when they're actually in a rating pull down rig or on track in a longevity situation, that's where it starts to show up. So
the biggest thing I can note to that as well is that the presetting on that. I mean, that's a huge step for us. Obviously, shop painting is relieving stress. You don't want too much stress in a spring. And every one of our springs, every part number has got its own design sheet to it. But as we build it, but the presetting, if you order a 16-inch spring, a 10-inch spring, whatever it might be, it's going to be 10 inches or 16 inches when you get it out of the box. And 99% of the time, it's not going to lose that because we've already stressed that spring and gave it its memory to where it's going to be that length when you order it. That's the biggest thing. When a racer puts a spring in his car, the biggest notable things to check if something's changed on the car. It's not driving the same. They keep making changes, but it's not actually changing the way the car's driving. Is another one. If you think it's spring related, pull the spring out, check the free height on it, check to see if anything's bent, if there's any side load or AKA bowing, anything like that. So our processes pretty much eliminate all of those risks when you order that new spring. Still can happen. You get a wreck, coil clash it. That's a big thing. You can lose a little free height from that. But yeah, all of our processes here, we do everything in-house. We have people here that understand it. They've been here for a long, long time, years and years, and they understand that spring is supposed to do that. Yeah, they get their tools out and they measure them, but a lot of these guys can see it with their eyes. They can feel it in their hands. They pull it off that winding machine and say, this is a little different than it should be. Let's go into further detail on this. Or yeah, this one's good, and I know it is, and then it backs up with the tooling. So yeah, the videos David's got up right here. See if we can get that shared. I'm sure it'll show all that.
One more thing, I think one more myth before we get into the it's a quick video of how a spring's made, just so for people who aren't aware. But I think one more myth I think that would be touched on is the spring feels flat. I think that's a common one. And that one's tough to quantify because, like I said before, there isn't, when you're talking a in the dynamic sense of a spring. When that spring is in movement, there's not really a good way to quantify or measure that.
There's no way, yeah.
So
We've looked at it
what
so
you
many
have
times.
what you have to do is you kind of have to take in a bunch of different factors and average it out. So I mean, there are ways to kind of sense that, but there is no way to just put it, you know, in a machine and say, yeah, this spring is flat. So again, I think it goes back to, you know, pulling that spring out, checking the measurements, put it on the radar, and not just at 1 inch, but, you know, 2 inch, 3 inch, 4 inch to see if the rate continues consistently down the line, and the back that up with the original documentation that you took when you got that spring, just to see if it matches. Once it starts changing, if there is a rust vein or something similar, or even the case, you know, this is metal. This is the only type of metal on your car that's consistently, you know, moving. Everything else is tied down, strapped tightly. A spring is definitely a unique piece of the car where it's metal, but it's made to continuously, you know, move. You know, it's got its own life. It is alive. So if something does start feeling differently, the only thing I would say, and what we recommend is, you know, it's cheap enough insurance, depending on what you're doing with this. If you're racing professionally or even at a high level, we just recommend replacing it. It's cheap enough. We got guys that, you know, think that these things, they can feel a difference at 33 races. You know, I don't know why 33 races, but seriously, I mean, we have guys that change out at a number like that. And if they go 34, they can tell a difference. So obviously racers have their own different beliefs and feels.
Yeah, exactly.
You can make them happy and they're going to drive harder or faster by changing it, then by all means, you know, we're not going to talk you out of it. So that's.
Yeah, and not to say that it's not the spring's fault by any means, but when you take, say, a front spring out of a standard A-arm control arm car, I mean, you're either going to be pulling a ball joint down, you're moving perches, you're moving this and that. I mean, my personal experience, if you're going to do all that, you're cleaning the perches, you're relubing them, however the perches are working. So all of that coincides with that spring change that you think, oh, it's the spring that went flat, but in reality, maybe your perch was bound up, or you had rocks in the control arm pinning the spring, or whatever it could be.
Seizing up or what? Yeah,
Yeah,
I mean,
ball joint could be frozen at that point. Just had to clean it up a little bit, and it rotates good now. So there's, when you do change that spring out, look at everything else that's around it. You should be good to go after that point.
Let's check out the video, guys.
all right, let's check it out here. See if I can get this to work.
And for folks out there, if you got a question, put it in the chat section. We'll get to it as we wind up this session with folks at Eibach.
You have to do another screen. There you go.
There we go.
Is that showing?
I see your files.
Video.
Is that showing, Joe?
We see your file structure. I would just click on one of the files, but we're definitely seeing your computer.
Hit play, and then on the right side, hit the expand.
Brad, you were screen sharing. Sorry about that.
No, it's fine.
You can't see the video right now?
I can see the video. No, we see your computer files. I -F and the two and the one above it. So you're sharing, just not the video.
Says it's sharing. You're sharing live. Let's start it over. Screen share. There we go. Maybe this will work.
There you go.
Is
There.
that showing?
Yes.
Okay. Sorry about that.
No, no worries. No worries.
Rookies
We can
here.
build springs, but if you can't.
No audio though. Whoa. Very good. Very interesting. I knew when I saw those springs, those were not for some light, dainty little race car.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, like we talked about before, I mean, we make such a wide variety of parts here, but that's what's cool too is, you know, from the bottom to the top, we have such a great team. And the top would be Wilfred Eibach, and his passion has always been racing. And I've been here 10 years, luckily enough to been around Wilfred a bunch, and his passion for racing has pushed through the company. So he doesn't want to let the foot off the pedal. You know, he was just here a couple of weeks ago, and actually he's going to be here next week for PRI. He wasn't able to come over for 20 months, but when he got back over here, I mean, we've made some huge strides since he's been here. And he gives us 100% support. We're still family owned, and yeah, our racing heritage pushes through all of our performance aftermarket parts. So it's pretty cool. I mean, to work for a company like that where everybody's passionate about what they do. Most of us have racing backgrounds or at least performance backgrounds, and we get to talk about racers. I mean,
Yeah. I mean, it's one of those things where even though, you know, we clock out, we go home, know, David's the same way as I am. Most of us here are, you know, we go home. I've got race cars of my own. I'm always touching it, you know, so it's nice to have, you know, they always say it's not a job if it's your life and it's what you want to do. This is the truth, right? So if I didn't have this job, if we're calling it that, I'd be doing it anyway. So why not, you know, be a part of it? Why not help as much as I possibly can? So yeah, it's definitely a good family operated deal here. You know, we love seeing all the coworkers every day, and it's an enjoyment to be a part of it.
And
Excellent. But we will be seeing you at the show next week, it sounds like.
Yes, we will be there 100%, and hopefully Wilford will too. So if you're
Excellent.
there, any of you there, stop by and say hi to us.
Absolutely. And I see Francisque and Judy are back, gentlemen. Jeremy, David, thank you very much. The education has been invaluable. So many different things. Good to hear you're involved in drag racing as well. I'll come track you down next week and ask you a bunch of questions that are very personal and specific. But thank you for sharing. The video was great, and thank you for your time.
The concept for EPARTRADE is basically, in my opinion, there's a big hole in the internet. So the internet started many years ago, but there's never been an online business community for racers on the World Wide Web. The need for EPARTRADE is actually quite obvious. Basically, people in the business of auto racing need a place online to hang out and to get their problems solved.
It's extremely simple for a buyer or for a supplier to interact on the platform. The first thing you need to do is sign in, which is free. And the second thing is, when you see a product that you're interested in, all you need to do is click on request more information. If it's a company, you click on request more information, and then from there, it is forwarded directly to the buyer or to the supplier.
You can go to epartrade.com, you become part of a community of businesses in racing, and it makes sourcing products much easier than just on the internet or using Google.
At EPARTRADE, there is no e-commerce. It's literally a connection just like at a trade show. So now, any time of the year, a buyer could reach out to a supplier through an email.
More than that, it's a place to go just to keep current every day. So it's a good place to start your workday in your racing business or in your offices of your professional race team. And you know you're current when it comes to new technology, industry news, technical papers, technical videos, all of that and more. We're not looking for a million hits per day. All we want is people who are really the volume buyers of racing products in the racing industry to be part of the little world of EPARTRADE. We have racing businesses participating from around the world. So you get suppliers from around the world, you get buyers from around the world.
EPARTRADE really eliminates having to travel, closing down your shop. Now you have a place to showcase globally your racing product and technology.
There are two types of people, racers and everyone else. Racer Magazine is for those who believe that racing is a way of life. Racer embodies the excellence that defines a sport driven by passion, courage, and ingenuity. Get 1 year of both Racer's print and digital edition for only $39 with instant access to our entire digital issue archive. Subscribe now at info.racer.com.